Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition, I suppose we should call it, of the Noon Book Club. It's really exciting to see all of you, or not be able to see you because we're just kind of looking into cyberspace. But we're delighted to have with us this evening Rachel Joyce, who is the author of Miss Benson's Beetle, which I know that a lot of you have got and have been enjoying. And I have to say that when I first picked up Miss Benson's Beetle, I wasn't 100% convinced that a book about beetles was going to be for me, but I absolutely loved it. In fact, I think it's probably my favourite of all the books that we've done in the book club so far, which is saying a lot. We've had some jolly good books, so I can't really say much more than that, higher praise than that. But the reason why that I really loved it was that I thought that Rachel so brilliantly captures all the things that we're talking about at Noon. If ever there was a book that was about finding a new chapter in midlife, or really finding your passion, or as I talk about, becoming the woman that you feel like you're supposed to be, then that is this book and this heroine. And I kept having kind of aha moments as I read it, where I thought, oh gosh, she's expressed that so brilliantly, and I totally agree. So I've been really looking forward to talking to Rachel this evening, and I hope that all of you will enjoy this as much as I'm intending to. So I really can't wait. So Rachel, so lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us from your snap, I think we decided it was, didn't we, in Stroud.
It's very nice to be here with you.
And welcome to the New Book Club, which is often quite a chatty affair. And it would be absolutely brilliant if you would kick us off in our traditional style by just reading us a little bit that you think kind of encapsulates the book or the themes or Miss Benson.
Yes, I'm actually now there's in the background, I now have a growling dog. Hang on, a growling dog. This dog is actually Mr. Rawlins, the dog. So I'm just going to lift the dog up.
Is he small and terrier-like and rather ferocious?
Yes, so this is Mr. Rawlins, the dog. Fortunately,
well, he's cute.
She doesn't realise what happens in the book. Nobody's told her, thank goodness. But she's really growly and yappy, and I thought the best thing to do was have her in the room with me, but she's already growling and yapping. Anyway, so
she wanted to have a moment. She wanted a moment in the spotlight, so maybe she'll calm down a bit. Yes. Or maybe you should read a bit about her and then she'll calm down.
Yes, I can't even think about that. Yes. So I'm going to read a book that's a bit later on. So for people who haven't read it, I don't know if I need to set it up a little bit, do I? Or shall I just
explain a little bit about it, because I've realised now that my beginning was very vague.
No, it's lovely. In fact, I was introduced at an event a few weeks ago, and the interviewer said, there were two of us, and she gave the other writer a really kind of beautiful introduction. And then she turned to me and she said, it was the worst introduction I've ever had. She said, so Rachel, I don't really like this book.
Oh no.
What are your thoughts? And I was just so thrown that I had no idea what to say.
What did you say to that? I've never interviewed a lot of people in my career, but I don't think I've ever done that one.
No, I don't recommend it as a way to introduce anybody, really. So I kind of made a laughy kind of, and then afterwards, like kind of halfway through the event, I did say, listen, I'm going to have to go back to that introduction, because actually I really believe in these women and I really believe in this book. So I'm going to have to tell you why. So this is a sort of roundabout way of saying that I do really believe in this book, because it's about two women. It's set in 1950. It's about Marjorie Benson, who's the kind of heroine of the book, and who, for reasons of her own, has had a lifelong passion to look for a golden beetle that may or may not exist on the other side of the world, in a tiny island called New Caledonia. She's never traveled in her life. She's been passionate about beetles, but only as an amateur woman whom nobody takes seriously. But in order to do this big expedition, which she decides to do in her late 40s, she has to take an assistant. And of course, the woman that she ends up with is the last woman on the planet that she would want to be with. So Marjorie, who is quite stuck in her ways and quite introverted, is matched with Enid Pretty, who is traveling in a kind of bright pink suit and brings chaos with her, kind of attracts attention wherever she goes. and is really Marjorie's just complete opposite. But they're kind of together, they do that. They travel to the other side of the world, which is a huge thing in 1950. And they begin this expedition through the rainforest to find this beetle. So the bit I've chosen is actually their first night in the rainforest. And by this point, Enid has found the dog that you saw earlier, Mr. Rawlings. So how does a woman get into a hammock when she's not got into a hammock before? Enid asked if she needed help, but Marjorie, still piqued after the business with the tent and also her confession that she'd never been on an expedition before, insisted she could manage. Enid seemed to mount her hammock with no difficulty whatsoever. One moment she was on the ground, the next she was in a hammock. She even had Mr. Rawlings with her, his ears glowing in the dark. "Sleep well, Marge." Marjorie's hammock was less amenable. She tried one leg first. It went swinging off with her a little bit on it, but mostly not. She tried taking it by surprise, mounting suddenly. The hammock accepted her weight, then performed a full cartwheel and tossed her out the other side, dumping her in a load of spikes. In the end, she gave a leap and pitched herself. She landed on her front, her mouth mashed against the canvas, rocking violently, but still she'd done it. Technically, she was in a hammock. No one could argue with that, though she could barely move without the risk of depositing herself back on the ground. It took a lot of effort to roll herself the right way up. She pulled the mosquito net around her. But sleep? How could she possibly do that? Who in their right mind would even close their eyes? The bungalow was one thing, but at least there had been the pretense of a roof and some walls. This was terrifying. Her senses felt sharpened like pencils. Her torch was about as much use as a paddle boat in the ocean. She heard whistles and screams from creatures she'd never even had nightmares about, let alone seen. Rough cawing, lunatic whooping, once a clang. When a pale shadow took shape, she lay taut as a trap, her eyes so wide they could have popped, until it gave a snort and became a pig. More whistling, more twitching. Another animal that screamed as if it was being eaten alive. She thought of Enid, the gun, then something landed on her face. Possibly it meant no harm. Possibly it mistook her for something friendly, or at least inanimate. But Marjorie did not feel friendly, and neither did she feel inanimate. Her first instinct was to bat it, unwise. It got mashed in her net, flapping and squeaking. A bat. She had batted a bat. And now Marjorie was panicking and the bat was panicking, and there was something in her mouth, but it was not a bat, it was her net. And even though the bat had flown free, she was swinging wildly up, down, like an awful ride at the fair, while 100 mosquitoes zoomed in to bite her. I could go on.
I could listen to you reading it forever. I really, really love the book. I think you'll see, everyone, if you haven't read the book yet, or you're kind of not there, that it really is. It's a great romp, which I loved, and I thought that it had huge amounts of humor as well, which really made me laugh. But it also really kind of packs an emotional punch. And I'm so interested in this unlikely friendship, and also, I mean, it's a real kind of theme of Buzz on New. But the importance of those new friendships that we find kind of in midlife. So do you want to, because it's so at the center of the book, and we'll talk in a bit about your about the kind of origin story. So it really is kind of based around these extraordinary kinds of female friendships. But just tell us a bit about that relationship between Enid Pretty and Marjorie, and why they're so unlikely, and also something about why you decided to set it up like that, what it allowed you to do.
Right, well, there were a number of things going on, but one that was, as a woman, I had, before I started writing it, really begun to question why I wasn't writing fiction that was entirely about women. You know, why I wasn't putting women at the center. It seemed such an obvious omission. So I did set out to write a book that would celebrate a friendship between two women kind of later in life, when one of them has kind of gone down a road that has made her particularly isolated and unseen. But in order to do it, I sort of felt there are a number of brilliant books about female friendship. But I thought, I haven't really read that many where it's solely about the women in their existence. Everything is about the two of them together. There are no men. They're not, it's not the kind of, they're not wives. They're not sisters to brothers, they're not daughters to men. They are purely, they exist with one another. And the other thing that I really wanted to do was to take the kind of boys' own adventure genre, which is so male, and to kind of nick it for women, basically, just to take the whole genre. So I really looked at that genre before I started writing. So that is.
And so tell us what kind of, when you say you looked at that genre, what kind of things did you go back and maybe
I went right back,
on?
kind of Robinson Crusoe and 39 Steps, and I've all gone looking at them all. They're all kind of round. Now I can't remember half of them. I mean, I just sort of went back to anything basically that's about men going on adventures, and there are really very few women in them. They're mostly at home, and there's always a dog. There's always a dog.
Yes. Well, like in the famous five, Timmy the dog.
Exactly. So that was the kind of setup, basically that was the setup for me. But I felt that I wanted
and was there something, I just want to jump in there because I was really struck by this phrase as well, and someone's raised it in the chat. So she said, isolated and unseen, beautiful and so evocative, something of us, many of us can relate to at times. And I think that that's really true. I mean, part of the reason that we're sitting here this evening, that I set up Noon, was because I saw that there were so many women who feel kind of isolated and unseen. And it was one of the things that I really loved about your book, and one of the things that I know that you're trying to kind of tease out. And it's interesting that you set this book in the 50s, and Marjorie is feeling kind of isolated, unseen, unable to really kind of fulfill all that she is. And yet there are still so many women now who relate to that, or certainly it feels very real still. Why do you think? Why is so little progress?
Well, because I think one, progress is slow, and it takes generations for it to actually be inhabited and learned. I think that is one of the reasons. I think as well, I love that this is mainly women. I think it probably is. I mean, I think, a lot of men.
Probably, I would say probably totally. If we got any men there on the chat, tell us. But I think this is very much an all-women group of very much what we call women in midlife. We are absolutely the people that you're writing about in this book. It was why I was so interested in talking to you.
And it is enormously liberating to be in a room of women and talk very freely and openly about how we feel. And I hadn't realized how liberating it would be as a woman to write a book that was just about women. So I wasn't trying to tick the male reader box at all. It just, for once, I just thought, I don't care. If they don't read it, I don't care. And in fact, I recently did one event, and there was one man in the audience, and he nearly got eaten. He put his hand up and said, "Why, as a man, should I read your book?" And I kind of thought, well, we can go all over the place with this, but I mean, I pointed out a number of reasons, but in the end I said, actually, you might enjoy it. But I think there is an assumption still, yes, from men that women, the books that women read and that women write will not be, intelligent. I don't even know what their assumption is. I mean, I find it really galling. And I've spent 10 years now doing events where, I often think men are kind of, like, even if I go to an event and there's somebody's husband there, it's like he will dominate the conversation. So this is all a very, very long way of saying how, for me, how much I found and how actually bonkers the book could become, but also how tender, how it surprised me when I just felt I had this, this women's spirit. And I was writing about what women can do for one another when they stand together, when they just go, we're going to do it. The thing we really believe in, the thing that a lot of men have not taken seriously, and Marjorie has never been taken seriously by any man as an entomologist. And in fact, Marjorie spent a good deal of her life as a young woman in love with a man who was a professor of entomology, doing the work free for him, but simply because she was so passionate about the subject, it was her only way to learn. And then for complicated reasons, she kind of transported lots of feelings of loneliness onto him. She kind of projected it onto him. So that's why I use the word unseen, because I think she's one of those women in the 50s, but I think, it's easy to kind of, in a way, give them an identity that's quite big, but I think we still labor under it now. But women who were in the 1950s, women who were, we call them my grandmothers. I think I called them my aunts, but they weren't. They were my grandmother's friends, and they had lost, now I think about it, brothers and fathers in the First World War, and then they'd lost brothers, friends, husbands, men they were engaged, fiancés in the Second. And then after that, I feel they were generally expected just to sit on the sidelines, because nobody, if they didn't get married, they didn't really have an identity, or they taught people like me in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And they were miss this and miss that. We didn't even know their names. Formidably intelligent women I was taught by, who we gave them a really hard time. We were really badly behaved. But a lot of the aunts I'm talking about were very poor. I mean, they lived with considerable poverty, I would say.
Yeah. And without much kind of agency to make their dreams happen. So, I mean, in a way, Marjorie Benson is a bit of a kind of a fantasy figure, because she does have the kind of the means and the kind of, she knows what her passion is. She knows she loves a Beetle, and she does have the means to kind of enact that voyage. But I love her moment of massive transgression at the beginning, when she kind of runs out of her life. And
yes.
I love that sense. I really want to talk this evening a bit about this notion of a vocation. So Miss Benson's vocation is the study of this Beetle, and there's a very tragic reason, of course, why she's very enamored of the Beetle, and it's kind of lodged in her psyche. But I think that sense of, tell us a bit about what you mean by this this word vocation. I don't want to do the explaining.
I mean, I take the word very seriously, and I thought a lot about the word vocation, especially as a woman, because I feel it can be much harder for us to hold on to, not always, but it can be harder for us to hold on to the thing that we know we need to do to become the people that we need to become, could become. But there's a lot that can get in the way of it. And there's a lot of great things that can get in the way of it. I loved having children. My family life is really important to me, but it forces compromises, I would say, along the way. And I think I do very strongly believe that there is an identity that as a woman I have, which is not to do with my children. My children can do what they want, they can achieve what they want, but I don't want to live off what they achieve. I want to do those things for myself.
Yes. I mean, I think it's so important that women have their own, what I call agency, that they do things in their own right, because they love them, because they're the things that make them passionate. And I've always thought it was very important that my children had a model of me doing a job that I loved, and being something in the world which was not about being their mum. I like being a mum, but I also think for all women, mothers or not, very important across the board, that we all have something which is ours, that lights us up, which is the thing that we feel passionate about, which gets us out of bed in the morning, whether that's a kind of purpose or being a writer or something that you love. And I think that that's what you mean by this idea of a vocation, and that's why it's such an important thing for women to hang on to. And I think it's something that we should talk about a lot with the women coming up behind us, so that they feel they're right.
Exactly. It's the word right that I think is so important.
And I still think, I mean, just to kind of circle back a bit into this conversation, because it was certainly kind of touching a nerve out there, that this sense of that still there are many women who kind of don't feel that they have a right, or haven't found their vocation or their path. And what I really want to do for women in midlife is to say that this is actually the time when you get get a chance to do that, I think, in some ways. It's
Yeah.
when we get an opportunity to become kind of, you know, what we're supposed to be. And we see so many stories of so many women who are doing just that. And it's why I really loved your book, because I just don't think that there's enough around in the culture which celebrates women's becoming in midlife. And I think that that's something that we should be talking about a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Sorry, we're in danger of violently agreeing with each other, I think. But tell me a bit more about your own vocation and your kind of sense of and why you wanted to write about this.
Well, I think, partly for me, my vocation has always been that I express myself best and I feel most myself when I'm writing. It's a good place for me to be. And, you know, when I'm not so great in places where I have to speak spontaneously, you know, or react quickly. And I've learned over time that I'm a quiet, reflective person. That's who I am. And it's fine. You know, I spent a long time as a young woman thinking, why aren't I loud enough and funny enough? You know, and I go to dinner parties and I don't say anything. And it's taken me, 59 years now to actually kind of go, this is who I am. And actually, I like being like this. So being a writer, even as a child, I knew that it was a comfortable place for me to be, you know, not necessarily to share it with anyone, but just that for me, I made sense of things by writing them down. And I understood them better by writing them down. So that I'd say, that's where I've been lucky, is that I have connected up with the thing I think I should have been doing. And I've done other things along the way, and they've all fed into it. That's the other thing. I think it's a sad thing if you sort of look back and regret all the things that you've done that have maybe got in the way, because actually they've maybe not got in the way completely. They've maybe muddied things a little sometimes, but maybe they've just added to the bigger thing at the end. So I haven't.
Yeah, they're all part of our becoming, I think.
Exactly.
I went to a very interesting talk the other day, and of actually somebody who was on our first noon retreat that we ran in October. And she's a woman called Aviva Wittenberg-Cox, and she talks about the ages between 25 and 50 being the kind of ages of achievement for women, whatever, or for all of us, you know, for whatever form that takes, whether you're raising a family or you're building a career, or, you know, whatever it might be. It's kind of the doing years, and that 50 is the point at which you start to become.
Yeah.
And I really like that idea. I like that idea that there's kind of all this striving, and then you kind of get to a point, and all those things that you've accumulated along the way, as you say, all the other things that we've done, which maybe you might think, oh, I'd rather be writing, but all of that ends up feeding into this thing that we become later on. And I find it baffling that in a culture like ours, where all of us, or so many of us, are going to live for a really quite a long time, that I love this book, The 100-Year Life, at which, you know, in which case 50 is only halfway through, that we should kind of, particularly as women, get to 50 and be kind of told by society more broadly that we're kind of finished, that's it. And every bone every fibre in my being completely rebels against that and thinks that's, you know, that has to be rubbish. And so I love your book, which is about the possibilities of this time. And I hope that it really encourages many women to feel that they've got a Beetle adventure kind of, you know, inside them too. Yes. And that you know, that we've all got a Beetle that we've got to find.
It was very important to me that, it's only touched on very lightly, but that Marjorie is, in fact, you know, without probably knowing the word, what it means, she is a menopausal woman. She has gone past the stage in her life where she can have children. So and I think that is, you know, for so many reasons, it's significant for us. And also, when I was writing the book, my children had just begun to leave home, and I'd really been dreading them going, and sort of feeling, you know, I'd been doing that thing where you look at family photograph albums and you think, oh, look at, they were just, you know, but actually what I discovered when they went was that actually I had time that I had before been writing you know, I'd been writing at this, you know, at the swimming pool. I'd been sitting on the side writing, you know, or kind of going to the cinema even with them and sort of not going into the cinema so that I could sit and write. So I'd been juggling, but, and just suddenly having this, realizing that I had this time opening up to really explore things and celebrate things and maybe push things in ways that I didn't expect. So I had thought that this book, I had promised my editor that this book was going to be a very quiet, short, beautiful book about two women. And of course, only as I wrote it, I thought, how is this book going to be quiet? It's a celebration of what women can do. Why should I make this quiet? In fact, I'll make it bigger. And I think it's the most extrovert thing I've written, because I think I'm proud of that energy that those women find when Marjorie, who is so, you know, I mean, has been unseen, but sort of, you know, a bit frightened and introverted, finds the Enid bit in herself. And Enid too is such a wild extrovert, so fast, so giddy, such fun, has to find the stable, introverted part of herself in order to become a mother, which is the thing that she most wants.
Yes, they both need some of the other's qualities, don't they, in order to become the thing that they want to be. And that, I think, also really kind of resonates, because I think one of the things that one also needs to kind of become this new thing in midlife is a tribe, is a new kind of load of supporters, whether it's a kind of a new mate or some people to kind of go and do new things. People who, I think by this time you have some, you know, there are certainly some friends who are quite invested in you staying the way you are, you know, in the box that you've always been in.
Yes,
and I think sometimes to move into your new self, to find your beetle, to kind of get your butterfly wings and get out of your chrysalis, you kind of sometimes need some other people to be the midwife to that, to kind of help you,
yes,
help you into that kind of rebirth, that renaissance in some way.
yes, I know completely what you mean. Yes, but I think also you have to, I mean, it is yourself you're really challenging, because you are, I mean, it's not just other people's perception, it's how you're going to present yourself, and not being afraid to surprise people. I mean, I think,
Yes, but I think that's what I mean. But I think sometimes it's easier
yes,
to kind of surprise yourself, or move out of your normal groove to, what is it, to kind of to change lane, as the kind of trendy way of putting it now is if you're kind of with some people who don't necessarily expect you to be a certain way. I mean, there is that, I remember that wonderful thing of going to university, or, you know, if you go to a new school, there's that possibility for a total bit of kind of reinvention
yes,
because they don't know who you're supposed to be.
no, no. No, I do remember that they always wore very thin early on, because you'd kind of think, I am going to be a new person, and or, you know, or even I got new hair and I'm going to be a new person, and then just kind of after a while just thinking, oh no, hang on, I'm back with the old. But I mean, I think that is part of becoming older, though, is that you well, I mean, it's so obvious, but you know yourself better.
Yes, sounds like a terrible truism, but actually, I think the older you get, the more true it becomes.
It is. But I think the other significant thing that we haven't quite talked about, which is linked with vocation, is instinct. And I think Marjorie's instinct kind of kicks in before Marjorie's does. Like her unconscious leads her to do that kind of crazy thing that you were mentioning earlier. It's like part of her unconscious knows that the old has to be destroyed. She has to kick against it in such a way that she cannot possibly return. And I think so when she does this, she sort of does this terrible act of, for her, rebellion. It's you know, years and years and years have been behind it, but it is not something planned. It's just that somehow she knows that things have got to be, you know, walls have got to be broken down that cannot possibly be put back.
Yes, and that she has to shift. She has to kind of shift out. And do you think that it's easy? I mean, I think Miss Benson is a great character, because I think we all at some point get a moment where you think, you know, just no more of this. You know, there's got to be something new. Or I think in midlife, you either get to that point where you kind of snap and you think, I've just got to do something else, or it gets done to you, and then you have to react to it, and you're kind of thrown into a new a new kind of version of yourself. As if somebody dies, or you
Yes.
get made redundant, or when your children leave home, however much you might want to go back to being the mummy who's kind of chopping up the chicken around the kind of at the table, or feeding them glue. You can't. That moment is gone. Time's moved on. And so I do think that there's that point in midlife where it can be a vocation, that this is something that you've got to do, or is that you've got to find a vocation or something that is going to kind of carry you through now, and that the old thing that maybe did it or maybe didn't do it is just, it's not there anymore. So you have to find something else. And I love that. I thought your description of how these women moved into that, and the pain of it as well as the excitement, was really good. Do you want to tell us a bit about some of that pain?
Well, I think leaving, and I mean, any kind of change is painful, isn't it? Because it takes you to a place that you don't know. And Marjorie has been so bound by the way that people perceive her, or the way that she imagines people perceive her, that when she decides, and actually it is one of those decisions that's slightly hoisted upon her, but she realized her luggage basically gets lost, which has happened to me before, and actually was incredibly liberating, because I suddenly thought, I don't have any stuff. How, all my stuff's gone. So, well, I'll just, and you adapt, and the way that you adapt is exciting. But anyway, the way her way of adapting is to, she has a wrong suitcase delivered, which she could send back, but actually it's filled with men's clothing. And it's actually safari. It's kind of good for traveling. It's good for going on safari. And so even though, I mean, I really loved writing the bit where she's put on shorts and a jacket, and she's discovered that the pockets are like really good sized pockets. They're not kind of namby-pamby little things where you can put a little thimble. The things where you can put string and all the things that are necessary to her. But she's also very self-conscious when she first sees her, as to whether or not she looks okay. So it's kind of bold and frightened. And that's where Enid, who is so instinctive, I think is so good, because she just says, well, like most of the men in New Caledonia wear skirts. What's your problem?
Yeah.
And,
no, I love that. And I think as a reader, you get such a sense of her new freedom. The chat's really lighting up with people going, pockets, I just, they all love that paragraph, exactly as you talk about her being able to put her hands in her pockets and have her compass. I remember you particularly mentioned there was space for the compass, and
she has tried to buy a proper jacket before, and the shop assistant has said, well, what you need is a handbag, and she thinks, I don't need a handbag.
Last thing I want is a handbag. And the other thing that's being pointed out on the chat, which also for me was one of the most poignant moments in the book, is that lovely bit towards the end where she's bleached her hair and she looks at herself in the reflection of the grotty kind of poom. Is that how you pronounce it? Poom town. And she sees herself in the reflection in the glass. And she liked herself. And some of the women on here are saying that they considered getting their own hair bleached when they got to that point in the book. So I think I think you really touched something very profound about that moment where you see yourself differently and think, oh, quite like her.
Yes, it's a very, very, I think that's a very big moment when you get to that place, when you genuinely look at yourself and think, yeah, I mean, it's not even that you're proud, but that I think that, that you like it is good. But it is, I mean, again, I kind of keep thinking of this little thing about instinct, that our instinct is always there, but it can be a tiny, tiny voice, about what is good, what we need to do, what's good for us. And sometimes I think it's about actually, especially at this point in life, it's like training yourself to hear it better, that this tiny voice is actually becomes more audible, and that which means you've got to practice listening to it, and you've got to try it out. And sometimes you'll do something and it just won't be right, and you'll realize, but I think often you do go, yeah, do you know what? That was right. I was right.
And I think that once you've listened to it and it was right, and you actually feel kind of happier as a result, exactly. I think that kind of, it's like a kind of virtuous feedback, isn't it? You're suddenly like, oh, well, maybe I should listen to it again. That might be a good thing to see, rather than
know what it is. Yes.
But I think that I think our society doesn't encourage us to listen to those kind of instincts or intuitions, does it? I mean, one of the conversations that I often have with women is, I talked to someone the other day who said to me that she felt like she was sleepwalking through her own life, that she just didn't really understand why she was doing any of it, that she kind of loved her kids, but she didn't live somewhere where she didn't like, she didn't like the job that she was doing, that she just felt like she'd got trapped in some life which didn't really fit her at all. And I think that can happen quite easily when we, particularly as women, don't listen to the things that we really like or love. But I also think that our society is quite good at kind of squashing that out of us or telling us not to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that traditionally we're given roles that don't encourage us to do those things that will shake things up.
Yeah. Yes. No, I agree. I agree about that. And I also think that not encouraging women to listen to their intuition or to pursue the things that they really love or that would really make them happy is something that that maybe becomes a bit more freeing kind of at this point in midlife, that lots of the hoops that society's told us to jump through, whether that's finding partners or having children or getting educated or accumulating stuff, which we then realize is maybe not that important anyway, or, all that stuff gets in the way of listening to the thing that might actually make us happy, what you so brilliantly termed the vocation.
Yes. I mean, when I was writing it, I was halfway through the book, which is often the case for me when I realized what the ending was. And I feel the ending of this book, the very, very ending, the final chapter, is kind of I feel that is truly what I believe. And I felt very strongly I was writing that for my daughters.
Yes.
I was writing it for other women, and that, the kind of to kind of not give yourself the opportunity to try the thing, your vocation, the thing you need to do is a failure. But for a woman, it's a real failure because there are so many things put in the way. So that to kind of not try and override them and overstep them. I mean, is a failure. I don't mean in the sense of like how I judge it, but for ourselves, I mean it.
Yes. No, but I think the one of the really crucial lessons we have to teach our daughters and all the women who are coming up behind us, that to listen to the small voice, to respect the kind of spark and the vocation in ourselves, and to value it in the way that I think in a way that men are really taught to do. I mean, I certainly feel that as a mother, what I really wanted to do for my children was to find a spark for them, a kind of a trail that they would follow that would bring them kind of, happiness and fulfillment, or just a sense of kind of interest or excitement, when you're kind of take the various things to see kind of what's going to gel. And for all of us, we need to hang on to that thing. And that it's a really interesting, there's some stuff on the chat here saying that they almost feel like women are almost made to feel that when they're not following that instinct, when they're not, is when they're being good, that society values them for all the things they do, which quash down the very kind of essence of themselves. And I think for me, the kind of, the final frontier of feminism is for women really, really being able to value that spark and to pursue it without society saying that they're selfish or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I don't think that we hear that articulated enough in the culture. And I'm just interested as to kind of whether that was something that you were quite consciously trying to kind of tease out in this book.
It became very conscious, yes. I mean, it became, somebody was asking me, I can't remember anyway, about what the book or but I was thinking, I'm always, it's about a story, obviously. You want to tell a good story, you want people to keep turning the pages. But for me, each book is debating a question, is kind of asking something. And this is very definitely a book about women not being afraid to stand together and to shake things up, to say the things that aren't quite acceptable, or that you're afraid of saying. But I do feel it's easier when you feel, when you find women who are, who are going to go, yeah, I mean, or who answer a part of yourself that isn't quite lived yet, but is there. It's just you haven't yet had the chance to put those shoes on, or whatever the thing is. But it's in you. It's like the small flame, it's like the vocation. It's just that those hidden, or those sort of bits that have got quieter over the years for various reasons. I mean, I think we are guilt tripped a lot.
Yes, I mean, massively. There's a good comment here which says women are told to be, yes, good, caring, compliant. And if we challenge, we can be seen as mad, bad, or sad. But I think that those we give each other the courage to live, to live for the vocation, to follow the spark, when we encourage that in each other, and when we kind of salute the agency in other women. That's certainly something. I mean, as a journalist, as an editor, I've been looking for years for stories about women with agency. I wanted them in the magazine that I ran at the Sunday Times, because I thought that there were so few of them out there in the culture. So whenever I could, I would put a woman with agency on the cover, and I would be sitting there in meetings going, all the women on these news stories, victim, murdered, arm candy, no, where's the woman with agency doing something in her own right? And I believe passionately that we need to be telling those stories in the culture to encourage each other and the women coming up behind us, because I still don't think that they're central enough, that's not the trope that accompanies most stories about women still, and that those of us who really believe that, it's up to us to tell those stories and to spread that message as much as we can.
I so agree. It's lovely talking to you about this.
No, I think it's what I really oh, that's really sweet. There's some nice things on the chat, but I think that there's a sense that, and certainly everything that I'm trying to do is to try and make these stories more primary in the culture, to change the narrative, to change the script. And so what I'm really interested in doing is re-amplifying the voices of other women who were on that journey too. And one of the most fascinating things about our most recent noon retreat was just what you talk about, this incredible supportive community, the way that these very disparate women from all over the place came together and over 4 days just completely bonded and supported each other. And I think many of us kind of felt closest to each other after that 4 days than we had to many people that we've known for a really long time. So I love that sense that this kind of a slightly kind of random meeting, as you have in this book, can bring together somebody who will completely change your life. And I also think that's something that we should be talking about, that the capacity, if you let somebody new in, for them to also change you in a kind of rather marvelous way.
Yes. Or I think it as well, I mean, again, I think it's instinct yet again. Marjorie knows somewhere, even though her conscious self really, really hates Enid to begin with and wants to get rid of her as fast as she can. I mean, I think it's natural, because she already senses that Enid is going to be trouble, but trouble in the sense that she's going to unsettle all the things that Marjorie has accepted about herself and about her life. But Marjorie I think Enid is a very different creature from Marjorie. Enid is much more she's as a woman, she's much more in her boots, I would say. But she too.
Yes, lots of people saying I love Enid. People are saying on the. I think she's very she's kind of squashable, isn't she? People keep trying to say she's a trollop. She's slept with too many men. She's too kind of mincing around in her pink suit. But what I love about that is you take all those kind of very kind of uber feminine traits, which can get a bit like the nasty woman in Harry Potter, and make them into a positive.
Yes, and also I think, well, why the hell should she not wear pink? Just because it's become a kind of stereotype, a blonde woman teetering along, pink suit. Why can't she do that if she kind of really embraces it and wants to be that person, and actively wants to be that person, but also is so in touch with the part of herself that is so, she's anarchic, she's not afraid. And she's got a real appetite for life, but she doesn't have the solidity of Marjorie, and that's what I believe she has to find.
Yes, and they find it in each other, and I like that complementarity. There's somebody who's asked a question about at the end of the book. There's a wonderful interview where Rachel interviews the characters kind of about where they are now, and somebody wants to know kind of why you did that. I mean, I loved it. I really did. I was like, I wish people did that in more books. I'd like to know kind of what it was. A great kind of epilogue-y thing, or a sense that they were still with us. But tell us where the inspiration for that came from.
It was, I think it was just I couldn't really quite bear to let them go, and so the final edits of the book had been, and there was, I think the book was all ready to go. I think it was actually lockdown. It was the beginning of the first lockdown, and I was really missing them.
Yeah.
And also, all that energy that I'd found, it was suddenly we were in lockdown, and it was just like torpor had descended on, not just me, but everything was stopped. And so I just really wanted to, I just thought, I'm going to write and I'm going to sit and interview them. And it was very liberating just to kind of be back with them and their crazy, and also just to think, well, why shouldn't I, as a writer, why shouldn't I interview the characters after the book and play with things? Why should they not have read, they haven't read the book? That's quite interesting. Or one of them has and the other hasn't. It's just sort of just playing with things that I hadn't really played with before.
Yeah, no, I really loved it, because I think everyone who gets to the end of the book, I can see this on the chat too, that when you get to the end, you feel so kind of sad. I mean, so sad. I mean, there are lots of books that actually there aren't that many books that I read, and I get to the end and I think, oh, I'd really, I don't want that to end. That's always the sign of a good novel, I think. But I was actually really delighted to get a kind of bit more of a dose of kind of Enid and Marjorie. I kind of really wanted that update, and I also really loved your kind of your piece about the origins of the book, which I'd just like us to maybe explore a bit for people who haven't got there. So you came across a picture of a. So this is the other thing I was going to ask you. Is Marjorie a lesbian? Do we think, is she? Because the men obviously weren't a thing for her, and we haven't really talked about appearance either, or because I think that's handled very well in the book.
I mean, I think Marjorie probably hasn't found her sexuality and does not live at a time in life when she feels free to. I think, even now I look at my children and I think the barriers, the boundaries that I experienced and accepted as a young woman as being okay don't exist for them in the same way. And I'm really excited by that for them. But I think sexually, especially, they feel free to kind of not put themselves in just one camp and live their whole lives in it.
Yeah.
So I would say Marjorie, might well have been a lesbian in another, 20 years. But is not, I don't think she hasn't found her kind of. But in a way, I didn't want to limit. I use the word limit in a very kind of not quite the right way, but I didn't want people to go, oh, this is just a book then about a lesbian, because and not to kind of just put it in a pocket, because it's so important to me that once you start putting people in pockets, you're not really looking at the bigger thing. And the bigger thing is about women going, no, fuck it, we're going. I mean, that's sorry, but that's what it is. So if you start saying, oh, it's because she's lovely, then it's sort of like, well, we're just making this all a bit, not smaller, but we're just we're kind of taking it down a certain path. And I wanted it to have a kind of broad hat on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really right. And tell us a bit about the photograph that you saw of these women.
Photograph, yes. So I'd found this photograph. I found it during the process of right. I mean, I was very, very early on, and I found a photograph of two women, and I think they were definitely living together, but not openly. But it was, I always get them confused. It was Mary Webb and May Morris. May Morris was the daughter of William Morris, so she was a sort of political activist and artist, a very intelligent woman. And she was living in her father's house and kind of became friendly with the woman who was brought in to do the gardening, who during the war had driven tractors. And from what I gather was a kind of foul-mouthed, heavy drinker, chain smoking, loved dogs, didn't really like people, but really loved dogs, and also really loved May Morris. And the two of them came together and they went on camping trips together. I think that, they did live together sometimes, but not all the time. They both had different homes. And then I found out that towards the end of their life, I couldn't find much correspondence between them, but that May Morris, right at the end, had bought Mary Webb a pair of pink rimmed glasses so that she could see properly. Yes. And then May Morris's editor had come to visit to tell May that she couldn't write yet another book about William Morris. And Mary Webb apparently took him aside. She also had guns and said, listen, I don't like William Morris at all, but you're going to publish that book. So they were just on side for one another. Anyway, I found this photograph of them. This is sort of so sideways. And what I loved about it was that you see, if you look at this photograph, what women can do for one another, that they can become who they truly are by standing together. So Mary, the kind of, the bigger woman who's the tractor driver, the drinker, is kind of like this at the camera. She's like really, and she's got her breeches on, she's facing the camera. And it allows May Morris to kind of look sort of off to the side and sort of, it's almost like she can become the thinker and Mary can become the doer, but they kind of, it's in being together that they're fully able to be the people that they are. That's what sort of really inspired me about that photograph.
Yeah, and I think that you so encapsulated that kind of so beautifully in the book. There are a few questions about the ending, so we're going to have to talk about this in a careful way for those who haven't got there. Some saying that they thought it was too sad, others thinking it was kind of poignantly, absolutely perfectly judged and just right.
Yeah.
Did you think twice about, because you were talking then about, how you were very, you would.
Yes.
The interview where you have them and they're there and they're still kind of very much kind of together and did you kind of consider the possibility, say, of a sequel or something before?
I didn't consider the sequel for them. No. I think as a writer, again, you've got to go with your instinct. And I knew what felt true to me, given the story that I had written, given the character of Mundick, who was pursuing them. I felt that I would be giving too sweet, a sweetener. And actually, I mean, I think it's dark, the book. It has a darkness, and that feels true to me, because I think the thing that you mustn't underestimate is that it takes enormous strength and courage to break free. It's not just like, oh, I'll just go and do the thing I need to do. You're going to get a load of stuff thrown at you. And my instinct,
doubt yourself massively. I think too. I think that the self-doubt, the kind of the long, the long dark nights where you wonder whether everything you've done has been a disaster and you're the worst person on earth. All that stuff. I think you capture brilliantly, because that is the flip side of the kind of agency or the kind of heroine's journey, isn't it? It's not kind of red roses around the cottages. It's not going to be easy.
No. So that ending felt true for me, and that's all you can do as a writer, I think, is deliver what feels true to you.
And did you have any pushback from your publisher? Someone also wanted to know about writing a book which was so kind of obviously aimed full square at the Noon community, which didn't even exist when you were writing it, but you know what I mean. Yes. us tribe of midlife ladies who are trying to support each other into our next act. I mean, you could be kind of writing our manifesto.
No, I mean, I had nothing but encouragement, which was great. I mean, I'm given pretty free rein. I'm lucky. So, but I think, again, as a writer, I certainly couldn't. If I ever try to write anything where I'm sort of writing what I think I should write, or to some sort of idea that I have of what would be acceptable, it just really quickly gets smelly. You just think, oh no, this isn't good. This isn't me. What am I doing? I'm trying to be another writer. So I was just encouraged to do what I had to do. I mean, I think it's quite interesting sometimes to think about how women are, as writers, how our books are sold, how they're presented, and how we feel about that. But that's a kind of another conversation, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, that's the whole thing. We were talking earlier about will men read books by women? I had a real one of that in my own house the other day, because I don't know if you've read Sorrow and Bliss, which another book of history, but
Oh, I know. No, I haven't yet read it, but I know all
yeah,
about
it's a really beautiful book. It's one that I recommend it to you. I'm sure a lot of you read it. But it's a book about a woman, but it's kind of about a couple. Anyway, I handed it to my husband. My husband's he's quite well trained. He will be quite a lot of books by women. He absolutely loved the Bernadine Everest Stone, all that kind of stuff. He's reasonably good. But he was about halfway through it, and he was like, "Oh, this is such a girl's book." And I got really cross with him about it. And I was like, "What, what do you mean by that? That's rubbish." And then he got to the end, and he changed his mind, and he was like, "No, it was good." But it was I think that there is a kind of the way that things can be sold as chick lit, or why should a man not be interested in in your book in just the same ways that I would read Jonathan Franson's the corrections or anything else. I mean, it's the same thing, as long as it's kind of beautifully and deftly done and feels truthful about the kind of human condition, and like you're learning something. Why should it matter if a man or a woman wrote it?
I agree. I mean, of course, I agree.
But it is a weird thing. I think Marianne Seacart is good on this. I think it really comes down to her, a lot of the stuff about the authority gap, and I think also the sense that maybe that there's still kind of something very much in the culture which thinks that women's stories are kind of somehow less important or less less universal than a man's story. And I that again, not something that I particularly would subscribe to. So what will your next book be about? She says excited. Are there more Beetles? Are there more
I don't think there
midlife
are
lady adventures?
now.
I hope so.
Well, I think midlife ladies are just because I felt I kind of found something for myself that I'm not really willing to let go. So I think for now, all I can see, and I'm quite lucky because I do get a lot of books kind of stalking me, waiting to be written. But they are all now.
I love the idea of them stalking you. They all kind of like hiding behind your table behind you.
They are. They're yes.
Right, me next.
But they are all very. They're very, very women. I mean, they're women driven, and I feel very passionately now that as a writer, that's my place. That's what I want to say. It feels important to me. It feels important to me to tell those stories, and also just to debate amongst myself, the ideas that are coming up for me as a woman. I mean, why would I not? It seems crazy.
Yeah, no. There's someone here saying my male tutor on my creative writing course says the love song of Miss Queen Hennessy is one of his favourite novels, and saying how always moved they are by the way that you write about human relationships. So you've got some big fans on here, and Katie Bond, another publishing queen, says, what are the other great books about female friendship that you mentioned at the beginning, Rachel?
Well, do you know,
it's a good question, Katie. I was thinking that as you said it.
Well,
what else do you like?
I mean, I always like reading Anne Tyler, but I mean, there's
yes,
I think she's brilliant on female friendship.
Yeah,
I think. Oh, now I'm looking at the bookshelf. I've just gone completely blank, which is what happens. No, I'm now gone completely back. I mean, I was thinking more when I was writing about people like Eleanor Ferrante. I think, but I was, at one point I was writing it, there was, was on at the National, so I went to see it, and I was in it, and I was thinking, well, what am I doing? It's just been done, it's been done. But of course, one, it hadn't been done by me, and, that's the best you can do. But also just that was another reason for just pushing the genre, kind of trying to go into a place where women's fiction doesn't traditionally go.
Yeah, no, which was completely brilliant. I love it that you mentioned Elena Ferrante. I actually went on my own. I went to Naples last week on my own Elena Ferrante kind of fan tour. We went out to Progida on the boat, and I walked through all those alleys where the protagonist lives, and the crumbling palazzo. I recommend, if any of you haven't been to Naples, I highly recommend it. Not just for Elena Ferrante, but because I think it's the most charming Italian city I've ever been to. But I love that for the female friendship there, and I think that
Yes.
that really kind of got to the essence, the kind of competition and the kind of
Exactly.
the kind of just the complicatedness of it, the kind of layers of it, the vulnerabilities that you know in each other, and also I think the terrible hurt when those friendships go wrong. I mean, I think all of us in our 50s have had one long friendship which has hit the rocks, and it's one of those things that's very, 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 very hard to get over, because it's like it's like a rejection of such an enormously kind of deep part of you.
I think they are very hard, and I do have a few friends in their 50s who've suffered from a massive kind of breakup within a friendship. But I do wonder if it goes back to the thing you were talking about earlier with, you know, maybe if it's not yourself, the other person actually needing to push themselves in a new direction, and you or the friendship is too entangled.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can't take everything with us that we want to take with us, or, you know, or sometimes I think you can look back and realize and pick something up again. I mean, I think so long as you're able to accept your failures and your mistakes.
No, I think that that's really true. And I also think it's very true in women's lives, that I've certainly seen with friends of mine, maybe who didn't have children, that there was a time when you go into that very intensive child rearing zone. And if they weren't in that actually now is a time when everyone's lives kind of come back together, and you reconnect with different kinds of different friends. And then the other last thing I really wanted to ask you about was, do you think that we move into a different so it sounds a bit corny. Do you think that there's a kind of spiritual hunger, or a kind of a need for a connection to something kind of bigger or more essential, which also drives this change in midlife?
I really do. I really do, because I think physically we change. I mean, you know, as women, we experience a change. And so, you know, I mean, I kind of suddenly felt my body, which I'd looked at a certain way. I mean, I don't just mean getting kind of, you know, green clear. And I mean, actually, that my body can't do what it used to do. And it did cause me, I'd say, quite a few years of feeling very unsettled and lost and low. But I feel now that it's exactly what the thing I'm looking for is a spiritual thing. And I think I don't actually mean a church thing. I mean more that I feel that the energy that the kind of experience with other women is like meeting with elders for me. I very much want to spend time, and I find I am seeking out women who are, you know, who know better and who have something to show me. I mean, not men. It doesn't interest me, but I do feel I would love to sit by a campfire and talk with women from all over the world. I would really love that.
Well, Rachel, we might just be able to make that little wish come true, because one of the things that we do at Noon is we run these retreats, and increasingly women of exactly this age are coming from all over the world to come and be part of that, and to sit around a fire and throw the things they want to leave behind on the fire, and talk about the possibility of the new, and talk about transformation and change. Agency, which I think has been, and vocation, which has been a kind of big story of the evening, and also how we make that last chunk of our life really matter, make it count. We're so lucky to be kind of here on this earth, so, you know, if we've only got, well, you know, maybe we've got as much again left, so we might as well do something that we love, and if we haven't, then you want to make the time that there is there kind of really count, and do the thing that we're really here to do. So thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for being such an amazing Noon Book Club guest. It's been a really fantastic conversation, and I would really love it if you came back, or if you would kind of come and be part of some of the things that we're doing, because I think that you're very much on all of our wavelengths, and they absolutely love you out here on the chat. so please come back again. And be part of, because, you know, what you're writing about is exactly what we're trying to create, is to try and bring into the world a kind of supportive community for women at this stage, to help them into a kind of more joyful next chapter.
I
Definitely,
really
bringing on the
believe
joy
that
and the fun.
And I think it is the joy and the fun, but I also think we have a responsibility. I mean, when you look at the way things are, I think women have a responsibility now to stand together. I really believe that.
No, I totally, I'm totally with you on that. So, Rachel, thank you so much. I really loved your book. I'm slightly ashamed to say it's the only thing of yours that I've read, but I'm going to go and seek out your entire back catalogue, as are so many of these people on the chat. Lots of people saying Rachel's my favourite writer, just so amazing. This was a really life affirming. This is my favourite hour of the week. So I think they've had a good time out there. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed it. I've talked about all the things that I really care about, which always good. And thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't read it, Miss Benson's Beetle, amazing Rachel Joyce, and hopefully she will come back. And for those of you who've come in not really knowing very much about Noon, we're a new platform for women in midlife to have all these kind of conversations. There's lots more of this on our website, noon.org.uk. And I really recommend to you the rest of Rachel Joyce's incredible books. I'm going to be going and reading them myself. I hope you do too. And thanks so much to Alison Barrow at Transworld and everyone at Penguin for supporting on us on this. And thank all of you out there for listening and for watching and giving up some of your Tuesday night to come and be part of our Noon Book Club. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Rachel. And thanks to Jennifer, who's been the amazing tech lady in the background and keeps us all on the road. So hopefully we'll be back in December. It may be January, just depending on various logistics, but we'll keep you posted on that. And thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Rachel. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.